Easily one of the deadliest air accidents in aviation history of South Korea. At least 179 people have died in that plane crash at Muan Airport earlier today. The Boeing aircraft 737-800 operated by Jeju Air carrying 181 people on board went down earlier today. Only 2 crew members have been rescued. A national mourning period has been declared until 4th of January. The exact cause of the crash is still unknown. South Korean authorities have retrieved both the black boxes. That's the latest update we have, the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, to ascertain the reason behind the crash. They suspect a bird strike or adverse weather conditions would have contributed to the air accident. Officials say that air traffic controllers warned the aircraft about bird strike risks minutes before the accident actually took place. And in fact, one of the surviving crew members reportedly mentioned a bird strike after being rescued. South Korea's acting president Choi Sang-mok has declared Muan as a special disaster zone now after he visited the crash site and took stock of the situation. Choi held an emergency meeting at Muan County office. He assured that the government is channeling all its resources in dealing with the crash.
정부는 전남 무안군을 특별 재난 지역으로 선포하고 피해 수습, 유가족 지원, 부상자 치료 등 필요한 지원을 다하겠습니다.
The Jeju airplane returning from Thailand veered off the runway at the time of landing and eventually crashed. South Korea's transport ministry said the flight was landing shortly after 9 a.m. at the airport in the south of the country. The route of the flight is seen on the aircraft tracker. It was taking off from Bangkok and completing the flight in Muan, where it eventually crashed. Even as emergency services continue working into the night at South Korean airport, a tense situation prevails inside the airport terminal. These are the images of the families which are desperately waiting with bated breath to hear about the news of their loved ones. As I mentioned earlier, 179 out of 181 people dead. While many broke into tears, others are yet to come to terms with this reality.
대통령이 공석인 상황에서 또 이런 식으로 또 일들이 좀 벌어지다 보니까 조금 더 이제 일처리가 원활하지 않을 것 같기도 하다는 걱정이 좀 많이 되고 마음이 좀 더 무거워지는 것 같습니다.
The CEO of South Korean Airline Jeju Air has apologized to the families of the victims. CEO Kim Lee-bae said the cause of the crash was still unknown and that the aircraft had no record of accidents and there were no early signs of malfunction either. Questions regarding what really caused the plane to crash. Seth Miller, aero and aviation journalist and editor of PaxEx, joins us live on the broadcast. He's joining us from New Hampshire in the US. Seth, thank you so much for joining me on the broadcast. A bird strike has emerged as a possible factor in Sunday's crash after officials revealed that air traffic controllers warned the aircraft, and that warning came just a few minutes before the actual tragedy took place. Now, this happened at Muan, and the airport has recorded the highest rate of bird strikes in South Korea. Have you picked up anything further on the possible reasons for the crash? This is what the latest reports have suggested so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, a bird strike is a problem. There's some video showing possibly an issue with one of the engines shortly before the landing. You know, I think to say that that was absolutely the problem, not ready to conclude that yet. We certainly need to wait to see what the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder have in them, and now that they've been recovered. It's also interesting to note that the aircraft spent some time between when it was last tracked by external services and when it landed. We know that because, among other things, it landed headed south, where the last tracking had it heading north to land. So it tried to land at one point. It did a second landing. The fact that it landed with its gear up rather than lowering the wheels is certainly very, very abnormal. It is not something pilots typically like to do, and there are a lot of redundancies to try to make sure that the wheels can be deployed before a wheels up landing occurs. So a lot of unknowns here still in these early hours, a lot to still try to figure out about what happened.
Seth, from the footage that we've seen of the crash, I know there are 1 or 2 visuals at most which are doing the rounds at this point. Anything peculiar that you noticed a few points that you just mentioned in your earlier response. If you could elaborate on that further, anything peculiar that you noticed, and we'll need to just deliberate on what is visible in that video before the black box investigations come through.
Yeah, like I said, the fact that it was a wheels-up landing, very interesting choice. Ideally, the wheels would be down, obviously, and there are ways to deploy them manually, so even if the hydraulics had failed. So we're going to hopefully hear in the CVR recording what led to that decision. And then, beyond that, figuring out should the flaps have been deployed to help slow the plane down as it made its approach, for example. It was definitely moving very quickly as it touched down. I will say the pilots got it down on the runway, very level, very steady for a belly landing. Unfortunately, it happened to come down far enough along the runway that it just ran out of space and did not have time to fully slow before hitting the embankment at the end of the field.
Now, that embankment should not have been there, and that is also something that one of the reports is suggesting. So there are a lot of questions being raised, but I just want to come back to the bird strike. Now, all bird strikes don't lead to a tragedy of this scale. So in case of a bird strike, and there have been many other bird strikes to planes earlier in WION itself, is it just a matter of chance after that one may lead to a tragedy like this and maybe it doesn't? Or is there anything that can be, that you've read up in your research so far that suggests otherwise?
No, it is very much a situation of chance. You may recall there was the situation in the United States many years ago now where an aircraft leaving New York hit birds and both engines failed and it landed on the Hudson, US 1549. It was something of a miracle that they landed and no one was killed in that incident. This obviously ended very much the other way. And so, aircraft are tested for being able to have a bird strike and what the impact of that will be. This aircraft, even with the bird strike, was able still to control its flying. So in and of itself, the bird strike is not a critical situation here, but all evidence we have right now suggests that it did contribute to the overall incident.
4 incidents within this week. Seth, is plane travel getting increasingly unsafe?
No.
You wouldn't want to...
It is not. Air travel is one of the safest ways still in the world to move around. And every time there is an incident, there is research that goes into what happened. We have massive amounts of data that can be collected. And if there is something that needs to be fixed, regulators around the world make sure that it is addressed. And that happens far better in aviation than in any other form of transportation available. The numbers are spectacularly good. That, putting aside the fact there were these 2 deadly incidents in the last week, terrible tragedies, but air travel isn't still incredibly safe.
Seth Miller, thank you so much for joining me on the broadcast, sharing all your insights on this. We'll need to wait and watch what comes out of the black boxes once those are investigated. It's been an absolute tragedy what has taken place in South Korea. Only hoping that something of this scale never repeats itself. Thank you so much for joining me on the broadcast.